It's the fall of booty. Welcome back to another episode of WWD What Went Down. We're going to be talking about what happened between the Eagles and the Dolphins, as always. We'll kick things off with the fantasy side of things like we do every single week. If you don't realize that's what we do, with the exception of the week Cree took things over, you're kind of stupid. But anyway, let's get right into it. First of all, we'll look at myself and Karen's husband, who are still coming down to the wire. I had A.J. Brown, who went out there and did as good as you can ask him to do. 10 catches, 137 yards. He had a touchdown. He had 15 targets, which is amazing. The guy was doing great around the board. If he would have gotten 3 more yards, he would have gotten a big bonus as well. So overall, this is a huge match performance that definitely helped in securing my potential victory against Karen's husband. A.J. Brown, for the most part, has been really good all season. He had a mediocre week too, well, bad for his standards, but every other week you can see the numbers. He's been ridiculous. Um, then I also had Jake Elliott, who had a mediocre week. He had a field goal and then a few extra points to make up for it. But either way, this guy has been good all season, but the past 2 weeks he's fallen off a little bit in terms of the field goals. It's mostly because the Eagles' offense has actually started waking up. What I mean by that is they've actually started scoring more touchdowns instead of just field goals, as you see by the point after attempts made on a week to week basis. Am I concerned about this guy moving forward? No, not really. I think he'll keep getting a decent amount of points, but do I think he'll be the number one kicker in all of fantasy for the weeks moving forward, like where he's getting 5 field goals a game? No, not really. So I don't think he's going to be the number one option anymore, but he should still be a solid option though. Um, and then Karen's husband had Jerome Baker, who actually had a pick six. Now Karen's husband, it's not promised that they're going to lose, but if they lose, it's definitely not Jerome Baker's fault. As you guys know, I haven't really been a fan of Jerome Baker all season because he was pretty much playing second fiddle to David Long. But Karen got really lucky tonight. David Long actually got hurt with a concussion pretty early on in the game. So Jerome Baker went in there and started getting a shit ton of tackles because, he became the main tackler at that point. Um, he had 6 tackle solo, 5 tackle assist, and a pick six last night. He did really good. And yeah, any week where David Long might be out, say next week, yeah, Jerome Baker is going to be a must start option because the main problem wasn't that he's a bad player. It's just a matter of the other option out there, being David Long, is just going to be a lot better usually. He's usually going to be taking a lot of those tackles. But overall, this is a huge week for him, and it really helped Karen in staying in this matchup. If he didn't get that pick six or all those tackles, Karen probably would have been pretty much in the L by now. And then you also had Christian Wilkins. Christian Wilkins had an okay night. Uh, just a little bit under projections, but I do think he's a little over projected right now. Last season he did really good. This season he's been kind of falling off. To his credit, he was going up against a very, very tough Eagles offensive line that arguably has the best center in the league, and Jason Kels. But either way, he had an okay night. He had a good 6 total tackles. He had a forced fumble. He didn't really have any sacks or anything. He's definitely not having the caliber of season he had last season, but he's not doing horrible. I wouldn't say to drop him or anything because he still does have that upside. But at least this week, this is kind of what you're hoping for, is at least even if your defensive lineman doesn't get a sack or something like that, at least get enough points to put up around 10 points so that way you can at least have a consistency basis. That's what you're going for overall. But overall, he had a very mediocre night. Both of us had some big hits here in terms of this game. Next up, we'll take a look at Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled and Pussy. Now, Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled had Zach Seiler, who is the other defensive tackle playing with Christian Wilkins. He only had a tackle solo. Again, like I said, it's not really that he's a bad player, but that offensive line for Philly is just ridiculously good. They have a really good left tackle. They have a really good right tackle, really good center. Their guards aren't really anything special, but they're okay. But either way, it was a tough matchup for these defensive tackles, though. And yeah, he only had a tackle solo. Um, Now, I know he's done good so far this season, but I've been warning you guys. Well, I haven't really warned too many of you. I've just been kind of thinking about it as the videos go on. I don't trust this guy moving forward. I think he had a few fluke weeks. I do think Christian Wilkins has been drawing a lot of attention that allowed him to make a lot of big plays earlier in the season, but I don't think he's going to be able to continue it as the season goes on. Um, I just can't see it, to be honest. I don't think this guy is that much of a star player. Pussy had Tyreek Hill. Now this is where things get interesting. Tyreek Hill, don't get me wrong, he did fantastic. 15 targets, 11 catches, 88 yards, a touchdown. He did very good around the board. You know, it was interesting. We'll talk about it once we get into the game side of things. He went out there against all the Eagles cornerbacks, did what he always does. He went out there, cooked up, got a shit ton of yards, got a shit ton of targets, got a shit ton of catches. You name it, he was out there making it happen. But Darius Slay, for what it's worth, every time Darius Slay, their all-pro corner, was in man coverage against Tyreek Hill was locked up. It wasn't too much or too often. I think it might have been a total of like 4 or 5 plays from the highlights I was watching. But Darius Slay was actually handling Tyreek Hill's speed very well. And same with Jalen Waddle. He pretty much everybody that was on Darius Slay just didn't get a target. It was mostly James Bradbury that got cooked up. But overall, another good week for Tyreek Hill, though. He's definitely one of the better options in all of fantasy right now, especially for the wide receiver position. Um, and overall, this pretty much just clinches it as if it wasn't already clinched already for Pussy. But yeah, Scramble got his ass kicked in that game. Next up, we'll take a look at Rictatorship against MILF. Rictatorship had Jason Sanders, who went out there and had a okay week. He had a good field goal, which salvaged his week from being horrible. Yeah, that's kind of concerning just because Miami only did have 17 points. I don't think he'll do that bad in the upcoming weeks. I do think these past few weeks have been a little bit of flukes. Well, not the past few weeks. The last few weeks have been mediocre, but say this week and week 4 against the Bills are more circumstantial where he really isn't getting a chance to kick many field goals. That is the problem with Miami is they don't kick too many field goals. But I do think there's better options out there in the upcoming weeks, especially, but he's not a horrible option. He's just kind of mediocre, like I said, and just had a okay night with that field goal saving it. Um, and then actually, Rictatorship actually had Javon Holland as well, who had 5 tackles total or solo and a tackle assist. So he's going out there and having a pretty solid night. He's fallen off a little bit compared to his first 3 weeks, but if he's able to keep that consistency measure up, he'll still be a startable option. I don't quite know why he's falling off. Maybe the return of Jalen Ramsey can help. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, so far it's kind of weird how he fell off. I'm not going to say to drop him or anything like that because, yeah, it's been 4 weeks since he had those 20-point weeks, but I do think he's your weakest safety of your 3 for what it's worth. But overall, he's at least getting tackles, especially with the potential loss of David Long. I think that's when he'll start to get more tackles. And that could be part of the explanation is David Long throughout the weeks has been getting better and better, so that means that Javon Holland really doesn't have as much volume for these tackles. But overall, he's a pretty good player in real life. It's just a matter of if he's going to be able to hit those 20-point weeks anymore, and I kind of doubt it, but he's not a bad option still. Next up, Rictatorship also had Philadelphia's defense, who actually did really good against Miami. Like I said, Darius Slay pretty much single-handedly shut down either Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle on every play. Um, and yeah, they had 4 sacks. Tua was getting pressured all night, 8 tackles for loss. They had the interception off of Tua. They only allowed 17 points. Overall, this was a pretty damn good night. You're not complaining about this. Uh, your Rictatorship here, they also had a little bit of bonus yards with the return. But overall, Philadelphia did very good. This is a good sign for things to come because their weakest week was against the Vikings, giving up a total of 18, or not 18 points, 28 points and only scoring 18. But that's a pretty good sign, though, because this is going to be one of the toughest offenses they're going to play all season. You could argue Buffalo. I don't think Kansas City's a better offense um than the Dolphins, but either way, this is definitely going to be one of their toughest matchups, and this shows that they can at least be trusted when they're starting against those tough matchups. So yeah, Rictatorship's pretty happy moving forward. This pretty much clinched the match as if it wasn't already clinched, to be honest. Um, and then MILF actually had a player himself. I believe he actually had He actually had Devontae Smith. Now Devontae Smith had, I believe, four catches for 49 yards off of 5 targets. He's been kind of slacking. I'm not gonna lie. He had the first 2 weeks where he was solid and pretty good. He had a solid week 4, and he's just been kind of falling off since then. Like every fucking target on this team is going to AJ Brown at this point. Last season, at least going off of last season, what the Eagles would do is they would go out against teams that have good linebackers, and they would usually use AJ Brown, the tougher physical wide receiver, to get open and use him for the whole game. And they'd take teams that have struggling linebackers and pretty much just use Devontae Smith to just go out there and cook them up every play and get break off plays to outbeat the safety. But they're just not doing it this year. Devontae Smith is not out of the game plan, but he's definitely not looking like that borderline wide receiver one we saw last season. This is kind of what I was warning PMC about at the beginning of the year, where Devontae Smith is going to have that section of season where they just stop using him nearly as much as AJ Brown. I thought they'd start using him again by now, for at least a share of games compared to AJ Brown, but it's just not happening so far. I still think Milf won the trade just because he does always have that upside, but yeah, it's definitely not looking too promising as of right this second, but at least he's not bad. But overall, it's definitely disappointing. Next up, we'll go ahead and take a look at Big Yawners and J-Bay, the definite matchup of the week for sure. J-Bay had Jalen Waddle, who went out there and 6 catches for 63 yards on 6 targets. So he did the most with the targets he had. Like I said, he was also pretty much getting locked up by Darius Slay. But yeah, the rest of the Eagles' corners were struggling hard to cover these two. And it's kind of obvious why they're both wide receiver ones pretty much. But overall, he had an okay night. A touchdown would have made it a good night. 6 catches for 63 yards isn't bad at all. It's just a little underperforming in terms of his projection. I think he's projected a little high. Just because I do think the projections are assuming he's going to get a touchdown. Because, yeah, he usually gets around 50 yards or so, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. But usually a touchdown will make or break his week. But at least he's pretty consistent if you're J-Bay, who's never going to set his team. And then J-Bay also had Jeff Wilson, who was returning from an injury and had a whole catch for 4 yards. So that's not really worth mentioning. I thought he'd do more with the absence of the other running backs, but I guess they're not planning on using him too much yet since he is returning from that injury. And then he also has Kenneth Gainwell, who had 8 rushing attempts for 16 yards and a touchdown. Besides that touchdown, this dude's useless. I would say he's cuttable, but J-Bay's never going to set his team anyway. And then Big Yawners had David Long. Now, Big Yawners, I know it was my recommendation to pick this guy up. Whatever you do, please do not panic on this guy. He got hurt early in the game. He got taken out for the game. That's why he only had 8 points. He got those 8 points pretty fucking quickly, though. This is not a concern. Once he comes back and starts playing and he's healthy again, he'll go back to putting up those 15-plus point weeks. I promise. Don't worry about a thing. But overall, he had 8 tackles. He had 8 points off of 3 tackles solo and a tackle assist, and I believe a pass deflect. But he did go down with the concussion, though. So overall, that sucks. But at least it happened when you were playing J-Bay. But yeah, like I said, don't cut this guy. He's gonna be good when he comes back. Don't panic on him. He'll be a really good option for you for the rest of the season. Next up, we'll take a look at Booty Basher because I do not believe any of the other 3 teams remaining have any players. Well, B-Dog had one. It was Reed Blankenship, but he was out anyway, and B-Dog still started him. But anyway, Booty Basher had the entire Philadelphia Eagles squad on his team. He had Jalen Hurts, and this really was the fall of Booty. Even though Jalen Hurts went out there and had a pretty solid night, he had 279 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. He did throw that interception, and he did lose a fumble, but he did also run for a touchdown. In terms of fantasy, this is a solid night. Can't complain. It's not like an elite quarterback night, but it's pretty damn good. You're not going to complain about it. So overall, you're not complaining about that. Dallas Goedert went out there and had a really good night. 5 catches, 77 yards on a touchdown. Dallas Goedert, as soon as David Long got hurt, just went out there and started cooking up. David Long was usually better at pass coverage. Jerome Baker's always known for being more of a tackler. But either way, David Long definitely being out helped him. And yeah, he was out there cooking up pretty much all night. Especially in the early game is where he got a lot of his catches. Then DeAndre Swift went out there, had 15 rushing attempts for 62 yards, which is okay. I'd say, yeah, it's about okay. It's just about average. He had 3 catches for 13 yards. It's disappointing for what his projections are, but overall 10 points, at least you have a little bit of consistency there. Um, then you also had Tua Tagovailoa, who had 216 passing yards, a passing touchdown, and an interception. He had a -3 rushing attempt, but yeah, overall he didn't play that well. I really don't think he played that good, to be honest. You can watch the game. He didn't play. He really did not play good because yeah, he was pretty much trying to force passes he didn't need to a lot of the times, and half the time he would fucking just straight up miss. Um, I do think Tua is a good quarterback overall, and he has a lot of room to improve. But I don't think he's nearly on the level that people think he is. Like I don't think he's as good as say Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Joe Burrow. Well, maybe Joe Burrow if he keeps playing like this. But either way, I don't think Tua is really on that level that people have been expecting him to be. I think he just kind of gets carried by his elite wide receivers he has. But that's just a hot take of mine personally. And then Booty Basher also had Josh Sweat, who I believe went out there and had 2 sacks. Yep. Yeah, Josh Sweat has been one of the most consistent defensive linemen in the league. Whether it's through tackles or whether it's through these sacks or tackles for loss, he finds a way to put up points. So yet again, pretty good option for Booty Basher for the rest of the season. Unfortunately, Booty still took the loss to Mr. Steeler Girl here. There really isn't much he can do anymore. Maybe Booty can come back and recuperate from the next coming weeks. For at least what happened in tonight's game, the loss of Booty definitely isn't on the fault of these players I just mentioned. You could say partially on Tua, but either way, everybody else at least went near their projection or better. So overall, Booty's still looking good in the future. Here, it's just this 1 week he definitely fell off a little bit. Next up, we'll take a look at the actual game itself. Here we are at the actual game. The final score was 31-17. The Eagles defense did really good. The receivers for the Dolphins did pretty good. The Eagles' entire offense pretty much did at least okay to good, depending on who they were. But overall, the Eagles, I would say they won this matchup because they have something the Dolphins don't overall, and that's a defense. Both these teams have good offenses. That's fine and good, but the Dolphins' defense just doesn't exist right now. This is where they really could use a guy like Jalen Ramsey, who's a lockdown corner. And that's what I said about Darius Slay, because even if, say, the Dolphins have Jalen Ramsey, then that would pretty much mean they wouldn't have to worry about either A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith pretty much every play. That's kind of what they got him for, but so far they don't have him, though. Anyway, Tua had a mediocre night. I think that would be borderline bad night for the receivers he has. He just couldn't make it happen. He had 216 passing yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Definitely disappointing for Tua. I did forget about Raheem Mostert on B-Dog's team, by the way, who had 9 carries for 45 yards. But overall, that's a solid running night. But in terms of fantasy, it really isn't that special, though. And then everybody else was just non-existent in terms of the running back core. Tyreek Hill went out there and cooked up. Jalen Waddle did solid. Cedric Wilson had 2 catches for 48 yards. Raheem Mostert had a catch for 6 yards. And other than that, I don't really think anything's worth mentioning in terms of the receiving. But yeah, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, main story of the offense as always. Cedric Wilson was able to steal a few good plays. In terms of the defense, Jerome Baker was definitely the number one tackler. Followed up by Bradley Chubb, ironically enough, who had 2 sacks. He's a pretty good player, but the problem with him is in fantasy, he's considered a defensive linebacker, not a defensive lineman, which means he's just way too risky to bother starting, at least in my opinion. But he is a very good player in real life for what it's worth. Eli Apple went out there and played like shit. I think he got called for holding like 7 times. I could be wrong. Fuck Eli Apple. Then there was the interception or the pick 6 from Jerome Baker. That was pretty damn good. Other than that, there isn't really any big plays I can really think of for the Dolphins defense here, at least. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in terms of the Dolphins side of things. No, not really. Jason Sanders hit all his kicks for what it's worth. There wasn't really anything bad there. The Dolphins do get some good return yards from Braxton Berrios, so that's something to mention at least. But other than that, there wasn't really much to mention on this Dolphins side of things. The Eagles pretty much just outplayed them around the board, except for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, who went out there and did their thing. But other than that, the Dolphins just got outplayed around the board. whether it was on the O line versus the D line or the D line versus the O line. The Eagles just won every matchup there. And Jalen Hurts went out there and I would say that's a good night. He did lose the fumble and he did throw the pick, which stopped it from being a elite night, but overall he did still do good. He had 279 passing yards, 2 touchdown passes, and an interception. He did also have the rushing touchdown. You would hope he gets more rushing yards per game, but still, oh well. That was kind of the one thing he did bad on. DeAndre Swift went out there and had a okay night in terms of his running itself. Kenneth Gainwell kind of stole the touchdown from him. I think this is like the first time I've seen a rushing touchdown from the Eagles this season, but jokes aside, yeah, he did get a touchdown. I don't really think it's worth mentioning in the upcoming weeks, though. A.J. Brown went out there and just did amazing. 10 catches, 137 yards, a touchdown. Goddard did good. 5 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown. Devontae Smith did disappointing. It would be okay for a lot of other receiver standards, but for him, you would hope for a little bit more, especially in this friendly of a matchup against a team like the Dolphins, who have a weak pass defense without Ramsey. But for what it's worth, he did at least do okay. But yeah, it's a little disappointing, though. Swift had a few catches for 13 yards, so at least he's getting the target still. Julio Jones actually came on and signed with the Eagles over the past week. He had a catch for 3 yards. I don't think he's really going to play too much of an impact on the Eagles. I actually do think the main reason Julio Jones is there is to try and develop Devontae Smith, so that way he's not just a boomer bust type player. I think they're going to try to work some consistency with him. At least that's my thinking there. Other than that, I don't think they're trying to use Julio Jones as like a main wide receiver 3 because the guy fell off pretty much the year he got into Tennessee. I fucking love Julio Jones, but that's just the kind of truth of it. Um, Darius Slay went out there, had the interception against Tua Tagovailoa. Um, I think that's Terrell Edmonds, not Tremaine. Tremaine plays for the Bears. There's so many Edmonds in the league right now that are all brothers. But anyway, he was the main tackler. He's known for stopping the run. So yeah, he was mostly the guy that was shutting down Raheem Mostert when he was trying to make those big break-off run plays, which to his credit, Raheem Mostert was doing pretty solid last night. Um, for what it was worth, outside of fantasy, obviously, he didn't really do anything big in terms of fantasy, but yeah, Terrell Edmonds went out there and just made most of the tackles. Darius Slay went out there, had a pick, did pretty good in terms of his cornerback play. Um, then here's where the things got bad for Miami. The defensive line for Philly just fucking bullied them. They had 2 sacks out of Josh Sweat, as we already talked about. They had a sack out of, I think that's Nolan Smith. Fletcher Cox had a half sack, as well as Jamin Davis. Yeah, the defensive line just fucking harassed the Miami offensive line. Outside of Teron Armstead, that entire Miami offensive line isn't really anything special, to be honest. There really isn't any big pieces on it, but Teron Armstead is pretty good. But yeah, outside of that, I can't really say too much good about that Miami offensive line, though. And then, yeah, other than that, I will say James Bradbury is looking horrible. I think he fell off. Whenever he first played for the Giants, those of you who don't know, he was a really good lockdown corner, but since he left the Giants and got to Philadelphia, he's pretty much just been burnt toast every play. It's kind of sad because, yeah, he was pretty good. But other than that, I don't really think there's anything worth mentioning. Yeah, I don't really think there's much worth. Oh, there is one thing that I thought was pretty humorous. Let's take a look at these penalties here, guys. Um, so just look at the penalties in the yards here. Look at Miami's penalties called against them, and then look at Philadelphia. I just thought that was a little bit humorous. I think the refs might have taken the fucking over on Philly or some shit, but I don't know. I just thought that shit was pretty funny. And I think about 5 of those penalties were probably Eli Apple, but I don't know. I just thought that was pretty humorous. I hope you guys got a little chuckle out of that one. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys later. Me and Pussy are going to record the defensive back rankings video, and I'm also going to be either tonight or tomorrow. Either way, I'm going to be working on it. I'm going to be trying to work on that draft video idea I was talking about. I'm going to do 3 rounds per video where I rank everybody's picks for each round in the draft and all that, and like talk about if they're a boom, a bust, if they're mid, that type of thing. Either way, I'll see you guys in the upcoming video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Musamallah, moye alaikum for Darth.